The Blackout of Algiers. Prologue. The Forgotten Cargo. The year is 1943. The war in North Africa is winding down, but the hidden war, the one waged in radio waves, encrypted codes, and the dark corners of the human mind, is just beginning to peak. The hook. The most dangerous weapon in World War II wasn't a tank, a plane, or a bomb. It was a secret. And the secret wasn't on the battlefield. It was locked inside the head of an American codebreaker in Algiers, a man who, if broken, could unravel the Allied invasion of Europe before the first boot touched the sands of Normandy. Chapter 1. The Mathematician of the Eighth Army. The air in Algiers was thick and tasted of dust, cheap diesel, and the faint, unsettling aroma of fear. For Lieutenant Elias Vance, it was also the smell of impending victory or colossal failure. Elias was not built for the battlefield. At 26, he was a slender, sharp-edged man whose true power resided in the elegant, ordered chaos of prime numbers and substitution ciphers. Before the war, he had been a doctoral candidate at Princeton, more comfortable with the abstract geometry of the universe than the brutal, tangible reality of a world at war. Now he was a key analyst in the United States Army's Signal Corps, attached to a highly classified unit working out of a requisitioned French villa high in the hills overlooking the Mediterranean. Their official title was innocuous, the Allied Radio Monitoring Group. Their real mission was anything but. They were the hunters of the German Enigma machine's secrets. The villa, known simply as the Nest, was a hive of frantic, hushed activity. British and American codebreakers, the Y service, worked in shifts around the clock, their faces pale in the glow of desk lamps, their hands stained with ink and worry. Their job was to intercept and, more critically, exploit the German command's communications. It was a tedious, brain-straining grind that involved listening to hours of high-speed Morse code, logging tiny, repeatable errors, and applying the staggering, almost unbelievable breakthroughs of the teams back at Bletchley Park in England. Elias's corner of the Nest was dedicated to a particularly stubborn form of German communication, the daily operational reports of Admiral Karl Donitz's U-boat in the Mediterranean. The U-boats were strangling the Allied supply lines, and the North African campaign had cost hundreds of ships and thousands of American lives. Cracking the U-boat codes, the Shark cipher, was a matter of life and death, and Elias was one of the few Americans who understood the intricate three-rotor mathematics that made the German cipher machine, the Enigma, seem unbreakable. One night, amidst a flurry of routine, almost dull intercepts, a signal came in that was anything but. The transmission was short, too fast, and encoded with a variation that Bletchley hadn't seen since the Polish Victory team first reverse-engineered the Enigma in the 30s. It was a new, horrifying variable in a system Elias thought he'd mastered. "Lieutenant Vance, you need to see this," Sergeant Miller said, his voice a tight wire of fear. Miller was a radio specialist, a man who heard the static and saw the invisible enemy in the air. Elias leaned over the raw message log. It was a burst transmission, a technique used by the Germans to send a lot of information in a fraction of a second, making it almost impossible to pinpoint the source. The decoded message, after running it through a preliminary set of keys, was gibberish, but the header, the three letters identifying the sending station, was clear: Z-1. Z-1, Elias muttered, his fingers tracing the letters. That's Berlin Command's experimental line. They use it for top-tier non-operational traffic. Why is it in the Med? Miller's eyes, bloodshot from lack of sleep, were wide. "That's not the worst of it, Lieutenant. The key, the rotor order, the plugboard settings, everything is new. It's a variant. I ran the frequency against the master logs. It's transmitting from a portable unit. It's on the ground. And it's close. Too close." Elias felt a cold knot tighten in his stomach. The German High Command did not use experimental, ultra-secure keys for trivial chatter. This signal was being sent by a small, highly mobile unit, likely an intelligence team, and it was operating within or on the immediate perimeter of Allied territory. He took the slip of paper, the 3 impossible letters blazing up at him, and realized the chilling truth. The Germans weren't just listening to their supply lines anymore. They were here. They had changed the rules of the game. And whatever they were sending or receiving, it had the weight of the entire war on it. The lights in the nest felt too bright, the air too thin. The hunt had begun. Not for a fleet, but for a single, deadly message and the enemy agent who held its key. Elias Vance, the mathematician, was about to be dragged from the comfort of code into the ugly, brutal reality of counter-espionage. Part 1. The Cipher in the Desert. Chapters 1 through 5. Chapter 1. Above. The mathematician of the 8th Army, Elias Vance intercepts the Z-1 transmission in Algiers, realizes it's a new, on-the-ground Enigma variant. Introduction of Sergeant Miller, a radio operator, and Captain Ellie Hayes, a U.S. Army linguist, counterintelligence liaison, the only one who understands the local French-Arab networks. Chapter 2. The Decoy and the Ghost. The Allied command, specifically a skeptical British major, dismisses the Z-1 as a fluke or a decoy. Elias and Ellie decide to investigate privately. They use radio direction-finding equipment, hiding it as a French civilian weather station, to trace the transmission's rough sector, the Kasbah of Algiers. Chapter 3. The Broken Key. Elias manages to partially crack the first Z-1 message. It's not operational military orders, but an encrypted request for an American asset with deep knowledge of OVERLORD. OVERLORD is the code name for the Normandy invasion, which is still a year away and supposed to be the most guarded secret of the war. Chapter 4. The Rat Line. Ellie uses her contacts among the local French resistance and the Arab community to identify a German rat line used to move spies and valuable material between Tunis and Vichy, France, through the port of Algiers. They realize the Z-1 team is communicating with a sleeper agent, possibly one highly placed inside the American logistical apparatus that is preparing for the eventual European invasion. Chapter 5. The Capture. The Z-1 transmission pulses again, a short, urgent message. Elias and Ellie follow the signal into the labyrinthine alleys of the Kasbah. They corner the transmitting agent, a middle-aged, innocuous-looking former Vichy postman. They capture him, but the key to the new Enigma rotor settings is not on him. It's a memory, a mathematical mnemonic that only a cipher genius could recall. The agent, before being subdued, manages to swallow a cyanide capsule. The terrifying question remains, who is the American asset with knowledge of OVERLORD?
Part 2. The American Asset. Chapters 6 through 10. Chapter 6. The Interrogation of Shadows. Elias and Ellie are stonewalled by Allied intelligence, OSS and MI6. The existence of a high-level American turncoat is too sensitive to admit. Elias realizes the real German target is not the location of the invasion, but the method of the invasion, the logistics, the decoys, and the deception plans. Chapter 7. The Calculus of Loyalty. Elias uses the captured agent's half-scrolled notes to fully crack the Z1 variant. He realizes the complexity is custom-made, requiring not just a machine, but a human mind to operate effectively, a mind as sharp as his own. He finds a coded list of names among the agent's possessions, all American officers in high-level planning roles. Chapter 8. The Double Bluff. One name on the list, Colonel Marcus Thorne, a charismatic officer with access to General Eisenhower's inner circle, stands out. Thorne is due to fly to London with the latest Overlord logistics plans. Elias believes Thorne is the asset, but Ellie suspects a classic German double bluff. Thorne is too obvious. Chapter 9. The Missing File. Elias and Ellie investigate Thorne's office in secret. They don't find proof of treason, but they find a file missing from his briefcase, a seemingly mundane file on supply routes through Sicily, but one that contains crucial hidden information about the true capacity of Allied invasion forces. Chapter 10. The Last Transmission. The Z1 bursts again, this time from the Algiers port, right before Thorne's transport plane is set to depart. The message is the final confirmation. Asset will deliver. Rendezvous point, Casablanca dockyards. The German sleeper agent wasn't Thorne. It was the file, the stolen plan, and Thorne was unwittingly the courier. The real asset is the person who will meet Thorne in Casablanca to take the file. Elias and Ellie race to the port, knowing they must get to Thorne before the German contact does. Part 3. The Casablanca Exchange. Chapters 11 through 15. Chapter 11. The Race to the Port. A tense chase sequence through the crowded, chaotic streets of Algiers. Elias, the cerebral analyst, is forced into a physical confrontation with a German counter-surveillance operative. Ellie, using her local knowledge, secures a fast transport. They miss the plane, but catch a fast U.S. Navy PT boat heading to Casablanca. Chapter 12. Casablanca Noir. Casablanca is a city of spies, shadows, and desperate deals. Elias and Ellie arrive just hours before Thorne's plane. They have no authority and are operating entirely outside the chain of command, risking court-martial. They contact a skeptical but duty-bound OSS agent in Casablanca, Agent Dubois, who agrees to help monitor Thorne. Chapter 13. The Meeting at the Blue Bar. Thorne is met not by a German agent, but a beautiful French resistance contact, Madame Renard, who works for the OSS. The tension peaks as Elias realizes his initial theory was wrong. The exchange is not about treason, but about a flaw in the security. The German codebreaker was exploiting the Allied communication gap between Algiers and London. The stolen file is intended to expose a logistical weakness in the Allied plan to a higher-ranking German contact. Chapter 14. The Code in the Music. Ellie, an expert linguist, notices a subtle exchange between Thorne and Madame Renard. Renard uses a phrase common in a specific French dialect of the region. Ellie suddenly realizes the key to the transfer wasn't the document, but a microdot hidden on the music sheet of the piano player in the bar. The music played by the pianist is a highly secure, high-frequency signal burst that contains the final transmission. The Allied invasion will hit at Pas-de-Calais, not Normandy. A colossal, devastating deception engineered by the Allies themselves, but now the Germans will believe it for real. Chapter 15. The Ultimate Deception. The real asset is revealed, the man who receives the music sheet, who is not a German, but a high-ranking double agent working for the Allies, known only as Operation Fortitude. The entire Z1 signal, the missing file, and the chase were not a German plot to uncover Overlord, but a meticulously planned Allied deception operation to feed the Germans the Pas-de-Calais invasion lie. An operation so secret that even the American codebreakers in Algiers were kept in the dark to maintain its absolute security. Elias and Ellie were not chasing a traitor, but the final layer of the trap. Part 4. The Quiet Victory. Chapter 16 through 20. Chapter 16. Confrontation. The truth is revealed. The Vichy postman was a genuine German agent, but he was allowed to escape with the initial and fake intelligence about a deep penetration American asset. The entire Z1 channel was a joint British-American operation to lure the German High Command into believing they had compromised the true invasion plan. Chapter 17. The Cost of Secrets. Elias and Ellie are brought before the command. They are commended for their deduction, but severely reprimanded for operating outside the chain of command. They are told the war is about controlling the narrative, and sometimes the most essential secret is the one you keep from your own people. The emotional toll of being played as pawns strains their relationship and their faith in the war's architects. Chapter 18. The Aftermath. Colonel Thorne, the unwitting courier, is devastated by the revelation of his use as a pawn. The true American intelligence is safe, but the operation has broken trust among the various Allied services. The team is reassigned to the Italian front, moving them away from the politically sensitive European invasion planning. Chapter 19. The Silence of the Waves. Months pass. Elias and Ellie are now working in a dusty station in Italy, intercepting routine German communications. On June 6, 1944, a new wave of signals floods the airwaves. Elias listens as the German commanders, relying on the Pas-de-Calais intelligence he helped feed them, desperately move entire panzer divisions away from the real landing zone, Normandy. The elaborate deception worked. Chapter 20. D-Day and the Cipher War. Elias and Ellie stand outside their listening post in the pre-dawn dark, hearing the official news of the D-Day landings. They realize their chaotic, terrifying experience in Algiers was not a failure of security, but the linchpin of the war's greatest deception. The silent war, the cipher war, was the ultimate victory. They shared a single, exhausted look, the weight of the secret now the quiet foundation of their bond. They had saved the invasion, not by finding a traitor, but by becoming the final layer of the magnificent, terrifying, and necessary blackout of Algiers.
The Blackout of Algiers. Part 1. The Cipher in the Desert. Continued. Chapter 2. The Decoy and the Ghost. The British major, a man named Sterling, with an aggressively tidy mustache and a patronizing air, tapped the Z1 transmission slip with his riding crop. "Vance," he drawled, his voice thick with inherited arrogance, "you are seeing phantoms. Berlin Command doesn't field test their high-security kit in the middle of a conquered city. It's either a decoy transmission meant to burn out your batteries or some overzealous field operator playing with his radio." Elias stood his ground in the major's sparsely decorated office. The humidity made his service uniform cling uncomfortably, but his logic was razor-sharp. "Sir, the structural integrity of the message header suggests otherwise. The key settings, the rotor gorder and ring positions are too statistically improbable to be random noise. This is a functional variant, and the short burst confirms they know we're listening. They're communicating with someone on the ground." Sterling sighed, leaning back against the worn leather of his French armchair. "The intelligence reports show no German agents capable of operating a high-security Enigma variant in Algiers. The local Abwehr presence is scattered. This war is about priorities, Lieutenant. Our priority is cracking shark, to save the Atlantic convoys, not chasing after a ghost signal in the urban sprawl." Dismissed, Elias returned to the nest, the major's skepticism fueling his frustration. He knew Sterling was wrong. The signal felt deliberate, a silent snarl from a predator moving through the shadows. "He thinks we're crazy," Elias muttered to Sergeant Miller, who was already dismantling the direction-finding equipment. "The brass always thinks the listeners are crazy, Lieutenant, until we hand them the enemy's lunch order," Miller replied, his hands working quickly. Elias walked over to the corner where Captain Eleanor, or Ellie Hayes, was studying a map of the city's French and native quarters. Ellie was the antithesis of the stuffy military establishment. Sharp, practical, and fluent in French and several Maghrebi dialects, she'd been pulled from an anthropological study in Tunis to serve as a vital link between the Allied forces and the local resistance. She wore her uniform with a pragmatic looseness that suggested comfort over conformity. "Ellie, I need you to think like a mole," Elias said, placing the slip on the map. Z1. If you were a German agent, a top-tier signals operator, where would you set up a high-power portable burst transmitter in Algiers without being detected? Ellie ran a finger over the crowded contours of the map, stopping abruptly at the oldest part of the city. The Kasbah, the lower slopes. The buildings are ancient, overlapping, and they're riddled with false walls and underground cisterns. The electrical interference is already insane. It would mask a short burst beautifully. And the French police have almost no control there, only the local resistance groups, and they don't look kindly on Americans wandering through. "Perfect," Elias said, tapping the spot. "We need to confirm the location without alerting the British. Miller, can you modify the SCR-299 antenna array for a localized mobile search? Disguise it as something civilian. A French meteorological station." Miller grinned, catching the conspiratorial tone. "A weather balloon mast, Lieutenant? They'll never see the signals antenna. Give me 12 hours and a supply truck, and I'll make it look like we're tracking cirrus clouds." By dawn, they had their cover. A battered, dusty truck with faded French lettering, carrying an improvised antenna array that resembled a clumsy scientific instrument, slowly made its way into the narrow, winding streets beneath the citadel. Elias, dressed in borrowed French civilian clothes, manned the receiving set in the back, while Ellie, effortlessly navigating the chaotic traffic and the local scrutiny, drove. They drove a tight grid, listening to the static, waiting for the high-pitched, almost imperceptible whistle that would indicate a transmission. For 2 days there was nothing, just the endless chatter of legitimate radio traffic, the whine of generators, and the sounds of a port city at war. Elias began to doubt his intuition, fearing Major Sterling had been right. But then, late on the second night, as they were passing a dilapidated mosque on the edge of the lower Kasbah, the needle on the direction-finding gauge spiked. Hold it right there," Elias hissed, his breath catching in his throat. A signal burst, short, powerful, the unmistakable metallic ring of the Z1 keying mechanism. It lasted less than 5 seconds. "Did you get a fix, Miller?" Elias called into the headset. Miller, parked half a mile away at a less conspicuous vantage point, was listening remotely. "Affirmative, Lieutenant. Strong signal triangulation. It's coming from inside the walls, a small cluster of buildings just northeast of the central market. Looks like an abandoned tannery." Miller's voice was tight with confirmation. "Vance, this is real. This is absolutely real." Elias looked at Ellie, his mind already racing ahead. The Germans were embedded, operating a high-security transmitter a 10-minute walk from the Allied military command center. "The ghost is real, Captain. Now we find out what he's sending." Chapter 3. The Broken Key. Back at the nest, operating under the guise of an emergency logistics assessment, Elias and his small, unofficial team pored over the faint 5-second intercept. It was a fragment of code, a statistical challenge that felt tailored to mock his expertise. The Z1 variant, Elias determined, used 5 rotors instead of the standard 3, increasing the possible key settings astronomically. Compounding the difficulty, the plug board, the part of the enigma that substituted letters, was wired not electrically, but through a unique system based on the date of transmission. "It's beautiful," Elias murmured, staring at the raw ciphertext, a stream of 219 letters. "And absolutely malignant. The key changes entirely at midnight. We have maybe 24 hours before this intercept is worthless." He worked for 19 straight hours, fueled by stale coffee and sheer willpower. He started not with the code itself, but with the habits of the German operators. German radiomen were notoriously meticulous, but often predictable. They used standard salutations and common abbreviations. Elias ran the ciphertext against every known German meteorological and logistical abbreviation, hoping for a four-letter pattern that could serve as a crib, a known piece of plain text. Nothing. He switched tactics, attacking the mathematics. He used the known patterns of the five-rotor system and created a complex probability matrix, guessing at possible starting points. His fingers flew across scratch paper, filling it with differential equations and statistical projections. The room fell silent as Miller and Ellie watched the Princeton prodigy in his element, transforming numbers into a weapon. Finally, just before the 20-hour mark, a pattern emerged. Not from a military phrase, but from the likely source of the transmission. A high-security, high-level transmission would almost certainly contain a reference to the man who controlled all German forces, der Führer. Elias assumed the plaintext abbreviation for Command of the Führer, Führerbefehl, must appear somewhere in the message. He ran the abbreviation through the probability matrix. On the 11th pass, the ciphertext partially dissolved. The breakthrough was blinding. Elias had the rotor settings, the ring positions, and the plugboard key. He slammed the results into their rebuilt American cipher machine. The stream of gibberish collapsed into German plaintext. Z1. T19. Request immediate link with American asset, codename ARCADIA. Asset must possess deep knowledge of OVERLORD logistics and deception plans. Prepare extraction route via Gibraltar. Acknowledge transmission immediately. The silence in the nest was absolute, heavy with the weight of the revelation. Miller dropped his headset. Ellie moved closer, her eyes scanning the chilling words. "Arcadia," Ellie breathed, the sound barely a whisper. "The code name is American, and they're asking for knowledge of OVERLORD." Elias leaned back, his face drawn and pale, the adrenaline crashing. OVERLORD. The invasion of Europe. The plan was a secret guarded by only the highest ranks of Allied command. If the Germans had an asset with deep knowledge of its logistics and deception plans, the entire war could turn on its head. "Major Sterling was wrong," Elias said, his voice flat. "This isn't a ghost. It's a bomb. They aren't just here to listen to our supply lines. They're here to cripple the largest operation in military history. We have a traitor, Captain, and he's American." He looked at the transmission date again. Request immediate link. The German intelligence was moving fast. They had to find Arcadia before the extraction route was activated. The fate of Normandy was riding on an unknown code name hidden somewhere within the Allied command in North Africa. Chapter 4. The Rat Line. The hunt for Arcadia demanded a shift from cryptography to street-level espionage. Elias's decryption had given them the what and the why, but Ellie was needed for the who and the where. "The extraction route is Gibraltar," Ellie noted, tracing a line on the map from Algiers to the Spanish-controlled fortress. "That means they'll move the asset through the port, likely using a neutral or disguised vessel, but they need an intermediary to secure passage." Ellie immediately leveraged her network, the unofficial, often dangerous contacts she had cultivated among the French resistance, the Maquis, and the local port workers and smugglers. Her investigation led her to a name whispered in the shadows of the docks: the gardener. The gardener was not German. He was a former Spanish Republican who ran a seemingly legitimate import-export business, dealing in fruit, but whose true cargo was often people and information. He specialized in moving individuals out of Vichy territory and into neutral or Axis-friendly zones. This clandestine operation was known to locals as the Rat Line. Ellie tracked the gardener to a dingy cafe near the fish market, a place smelling strongly of salt and desperation. Elias, uncomfortable in the civilian clothes that made him feel exposed, waited in a nearby alley, while Ellie went inside. The conversation was in rapid-fire Spanish and low French, but Ellie's intent was clear. She was looking for a recent, unusual transaction, someone paying a premium for a secure passage to the Iberian coast, someone who didn't fit the usual profile of a Jewish refugee or an escaping resistance fighter. The gardener, a wiry man with eyes that saw everything and revealed nothing, finally conceded, his voice raspy. "There was a booking, 2 weeks ago. A man, French papers, but the accent was wrong. North American. He paid in pure gold francs. Not for himself, no, for delivery of a package to an address in Tangier." "What kind of package?" Ellie pressed, sliding a handful of American cigarettes across the table. The gardener ignored the cigarettes, but accepted a small, folded bill. "A man, a messenger. Not the asset itself, but the man who would contact the asset." Ellie returned to Elias, her face grim. "The courier is already in the city, Elias. That Z1 transmission wasn't setting up the asset's extraction. It was confirming the delivery of the messenger. The German agent we intercepted, the one who swallowed the capsule, was the messenger's final check-in." The truth solidified. The Germans weren't waiting for Arcadia to come to them. They had sent a highly trained operative into Algiers to make the crucial exchange. They weren't tracking a spy. They were tracking a transaction. "We need to find this messenger," Elias said, his hands clenching into fists. "He is the link to Arcadia. If he makes the exchange, we lose Overlord." They returned to the Kasbah, to the abandoned tannery where the Z1 signal had originated. This time they weren't searching for a radio, but for signs of a man. They found evidence of a hurried departure, a half-eaten loaf of bread, an empty bottle of cheap Algerian wine, and most importantly, a tiny, crumpled slip of paper under a discarded crate. On the paper, written in elegant, precise German script, were only 2 things. A date, 3 days from now, and an American military base address in the city's logistical sector, followed by the number 10 o'clock. The message wasn't encrypted. It didn't need to be. It was the simplest, clearest form of communication, the time and location of the rendezvous with the American asset.
Chapter 5. The Capture. The American base address belonged to a massive logistics depot on the outskirts of Algiers, a place where ships were loaded, trucks were maintained, and, crucially, high-ranking officers came and went before flying back to London or Washington. It was an area teeming with personnel, but ironically devoid of tight security for internal movements. Elias and Ellie reported the rendezvous to Major Sterling, who finally acknowledged the threat, his face pale beneath his mustache. He mobilized a small squad of OSS agents, but the atmosphere was tense. If they caught the wrong officer, it could ignite an inter-service war and expose the existence of Overlord to the world. "We go in first, discreetly," Ellie insisted. "The messenger is highly trained. If he sees U.S. military police, he'll burn the asset and the information." They decided on a simple surveillance operation. Ellie would watch the front gates, looking for any non-military personnel or any American officer acting suspiciously. Elias and Miller would be positioned near the designated address, a motor pool garage, ready to move. The next 3 days were agonizing. On the morning of the rendezvous, a tense, humid quiet settled over the motor pool. Elias, disguised as a corporal working on a Jeep engine, held a wrench, but his eyes were glued to the entrance. At 9:58 a.m., a man walked in. He was middle-aged, innocuous-looking, dressed in the slightly ill-fitting uniform of a U.S. Army chaplain. His face was unremarkable, but his walk was too precise, too deliberate for a man of the cloth. The messenger. The chaplain stopped near a stack of crates, adjusting the strap of his small, worn leather satchel. He stood there for exactly 1 minute, seemingly waiting. At 9:59 a.m., another man arrived. Tall, charismatic, wearing the uniform of a full U.S. Army colonel, Colonel Marcus Thorne. Thorn was known throughout Algiers as a logistics genius, a charming man who was part of the elite planning group preparing the movements for the upcoming invasion of Sicily. He was exactly the kind of officer who would have deep knowledge of overlord logistics. Thorn stopped a few feet from the chaplain. Their exchange was swift and silent. Thorn did not look at the chaplain. He simply slid a thin manila file folder from his briefcase and placed it on top of the stack of crates. He gave a small, almost imperceptible nod, and then walked away, heading toward the runway. The chaplain immediately picked up the folder and tucked it into his satchel. He turned to leave. "Now, Miller," Elias yelled, dropping the wrench. They sprinted toward the chaplain. The man, moving with surprising speed, bolted toward the back of the garage. Ellie's OSS team was already moving, blocking the escape routes. The chaplain realized he was cornered. He reached into his pocket. It wasn't a gun. He pulled out a small metallic capsule. "Don't!" Ellie screamed, but it was too late. The chaplain bit down hard. He collapsed instantly, the manila file folder tumbling from his satchel, scattering papers on the oily concrete floor. Elias knelt beside him, checking for a pulse. There was none. The man was a dedicated, professional killer, and he had taken his own life rather than risk interrogation. Ellie picked up the manila file. The cover read, "Logistics Report, Sicilian Port Capacity, Confidential." "He's dead, Elias," Ellie said, her voice shaking. "We have the file, but we don't have the asset. Thorn." Elias looked from the dead German messenger to the departing figure of Colonel Marcus Thorn, who was now boarding a transport plane bound for London. The file was mundane, but the transaction was anything but. "Colonel Thorn just delivered a file to a known German operative," Elias stated grimly. "We just confirmed the existence of ARCADIA. The traitor is on that plane, heading for the heart of the Allied war effort." The terrifying question remained, was Thorn the traitor, or was he a pawn, unwitting or willing? And what devastating secret was contained in the seemingly innocuous logistics report that had just cost a man his life?
Part 2. The American Asset. Chapter 6. The Interrogation of Shadows. The atmosphere in the Allied command bunker following the messenger's capture was one of controlled, icy panic. Colonel Thorn, alerted mid-flight and diverted to a secure holding facility in Gibraltar, protested his innocence vehemently, claiming the chaplain had been a beggar and the file transfer an act of charity, an unbelievable defense for an officer of his rank. Major Sterling and the senior OSS officers were quick to shut down the official investigation into Thorn. "You don't understand, Lieutenant Vance," Sterling hissed, pulling Elias and Ellie aside after a tense debriefing. "We cannot arrest a colonel on a mere transaction witnessed by a cipher analyst and a civilian liaison, no matter how dead the German agent is. To admit we have a high-level traitor, an ARCADIA, compromises the entire confidence in the invasion plan. The British and Americans will tear each other apart over security failures." Elias realized the grim reality. The existence of a high-level American turncoat was politically more dangerous than the leak itself. The investigation was not to be solved, it was to be buried. "So we just let him go?" Elias countered, his voice low with disbelief. "He delivered a confidential file to a German spy, who then committed suicide rather than talk." "The file, Lieutenant," Sterling cut in sharply, "the file was a logistics report on Sicilian port capacity. Useful, yes, but not the Overlord plan. Perhaps Thorn was careless, nothing more. You and Captain Hayes are officially off this case. Return to your encryption duties." Elias and Ellie knew this was a termination order. They were being silenced to preserve the illusion of Allied security. But Elias couldn't shake the chilling phrase, "deep knowledge of Overlord logistics and deception plans." "The logistics report is a smokescreen," Elias told Ellie later that night, huddled over the captured German file in the nest. The Germans aren't after the supply count. They're after the methodology, the Allied way of thinking. This file on Sicily, it's about deception. Sicily is our decoy for the real Italian invasion. What if the file itself contains a pattern, a mathematical signature that reveals how we lie? He began running the contents of the Sicilian report not as data, but as raw numeric text. He treated the data points like a long-form cipher, looking for a hidden structure. Chapter 7. The Calculus of Loyalty. Elias worked relentlessly, utilizing the same mathematical principles he had used to break the Z1 variant. He discovered that the numbers in the Sicilian report, when processed through a specific set of equations related to naval codes, yielded a baffling secondary message embedded within the statistics. The message wasn't clear, but it contained fragments of a coded list: W04, M11, T09, V14. These aren't coordinates, Elias explained, pointing to the code. They're initials and an internal index number. The file itself is the key. The logistics report is a primer on how Allied command organizes and conceals its troop movements. The person who wrote this report, or the person who understood its hidden structure, is ARCADIA. Ellie, meanwhile, had used the captured German messenger's personal effects to look for further contacts. She found an old French-language dictionary. Tucked into the A section, on the definition page for Arcadie, a region of ancient Greece representing pastoral simplicity and refuge, was a single, tiny photographic negative. When developed, the image was blurry but recognizable. A group of high-ranking American officers standing together at a conference table, smiling. One of the men was Colonel Marcus Thorne, but standing next to him, laughing, was a man Elias recognized instantly from command briefings, General Vernon Pyle, Chief of Staff for Forward Logistical Planning. "General Pyle," Ellie whispered, connecting the dots. "He has the highest-level access to OVERLORD, and he oversaw the creation of every major deception plan, including the one for Sicily." But the list of names, W04, M11, T09, V14, we need to cross-reference that, Elias demanded. Ellie used her internal contacts to get access to the secure command roster index. The index numbers corresponded to high-value personnel with access to OVERLORD. W04, Major General Ward, U.S. Army Logistics Command. M11, Admiral Monroe, U.S. Naval Planning Group. T09, Colonel Marcus Thorne, Logistics Liaison. V14, General Vernon Pyle, Chief of Staff for Planning. The key was simple. Arcadia was not one person, but a collection of high-ranking individuals who had shared access to the deception plans. Thorne was likely just one member of a cell, but Pyle, at the top of the list, was the most devastating target. They had been played. The Z1 message didn't confirm Thorne was the asset. It confirmed the Germans knew that the American deception system was compromised. Chapter 8. The Double Bluff. The true urgency now lay with General Pyle, who was scheduled to fly to London in 48 hours to finalize the logistical details for the Pas-de-Calais feint, the massive deception plan known as Operation Fortitude. If Pyle was compromised, the Germans would not only know where the Allies were not landing, but they would have the power to feed back deliberately misleading information, turning the deception against the Allies. Elias and Ellie realized they couldn't expose a general based on a code list and a dead spy. They needed concrete proof of Pyle's treason, or more likely, his catastrophic negligence. Pyle's office, Ellie decided. If he's a true asset, he won't be communicating via radio, he'll be passing physical materials, microfilm, documents, photographs. He'd have a staging area. Under the cover of a late-night electrical maintenance check, they infiltrated General Pyle's secured office at the logistical headquarters. It was immaculate, but Elias went straight for Pyle's safe, not to crack it, but to look for signs of unauthorized access.
While Elias checked the lock mechanism for tampering, Ellie searched the less obvious places. She found a small, seemingly insignificant detail, a specific brand of Swiss map pencil in the trash bin. Pyle only used standard U.S. military pencils. Ellie realized the German agent, the dead chaplain, must have had access to this office before the rendezvous with Thorne. He wasn't waiting for the file. He was conducting a final check. Elias found something even more disturbing. He noticed that the Colonel Thorne's file, the one they had intercepted, was only a copy. The original logistics report was still in Pyle's secure safe, tagged with an unusual, handwritten note in the margin. Fortitude review. Confirmed safe. Fortitude, Elias murmured, connecting the term to the known deception plan. The general's job is to protect Fortitude. But why would he make a copy of the logistics data just to send it to an unknown contact? Ellie looked at the small Swiss pencil. He didn't send the copy to an unknown contact, Elias. He sent it to the chaplain. And the chaplain was the Germans' way of confirming that General Pyle believed the deception was safe. The Germans were confirming the Allied lie, not cracking the true plan. The chilling hypothesis: Pyle wasn't the traitor. He was the most important target of the German counterintelligence. The Germans were using the Z1 channel to feed Pyle false reassurance about the security of the fake Sicilian plan, making him believe his deception work was brilliant and uncompromised. This would lead him to commit more resources to the fake target. The missing piece of the puzzle wasn't a traitor. It was a vulnerability in the system, the Allied over-reliance on a single, high-ranking officer. Chapter 9. The Missing File. Their new theory flipped the script. Colonel Thorne, the supposed traitor, was actually an unwitting pawn used to deliver a file that confirmed the German belief in the Allied deception. Ellie and Elias now knew that the Germans' highest priority was to reinforce their belief that the invasion would not be in Normandy. They needed the one piece of intelligence that would make the German general staff absolutely certain of the Pas de Calais feint. They intercepted an Allied internal memo regarding Colonel Thorne. He was not flying straight to London. He was stopping in Casablanca for a high-priority meeting with a British OSS agent named Madame Renard. The stated purpose was coordinating local French resistance activities. Renard, Ellie frowned. She's known to run a very deep network. If Pyle is being played, the Germans will use this stop to get their final high-value exchange. Elias realized that the initial fear was correct, but the players were wrong. The real asset was not the file Thorne carried to Algiers, but the intelligence Thorne carried to Casablanca. They quickly checked Thorne's known flight schedule. He had checked a sealed diplomatic pouch through to Casablanca. The pouch, containing final orders and updated logistics maps, was what the Germans were truly after. They confirmed the only thing the chaplain had managed to send back on the Z1 channel before his demise was the short, urgent message. Asset will deliver. Rendezvous point, Casablanca dockyards. The asset wasn't a person, and it wasn't the logistics report. The asset was the final, highly sensitive diplomatic pouch that Thorne was carrying to Casablanca. "They're not trying to expose the deception, Ellie," Elias said, his voice laced with renewed urgency. "They're trying to validate the deception. They need one final, undeniable piece of Allied evidence that confirms their belief that Normandy is safe and Pas de Calais is the target." They had missed their chance to stop the exchange in Algiers. Now they had a few hours to reach Casablanca before Colonel Thorne and his crucial cargo did. Chapter 10. The Last Transmission. Elias and Ellie raced toward the Algiers port. They had bypassed Major Sterling, leaving only a coded message that their internal security check on Colonel Thorne required immediate travel. As they neared the docks, Miller, who was monitoring the mobile signals unit near the base, called in, his voice panicked. "Lieutenant, another Z-1 burst is transmitting from the port near the refueling docks. It's the final transmission, I swear." The Z-1 signal pulsed rapidly, an urgent, frantic burst of high-speed Morse code. It was being sent by a different German operative, a spotter confirming the arrival of the package before the main agent received it. Elias and Ellie spotted Colonel Thorne's plane taxiing down the runway, preparing for takeoff. "Miller, crack it, now!" Elias ordered over the radio. They arrived at the docks as the Z-1 transmission died. Elias and Ellie spotted a man in a dock worker's uniform dropping a small radio unit into the water and calmly walking away. They were too late to catch him. But Miller's voice crackled back with the translated plain text, the final, devastating piece of intelligence confirming the German strategy. Z-1T-20. Confirmed delivery of package imminent. Final proof of Fortitude deception plan secured. Target Pas-de-Calais confirmed. Divert all major defense units immediately. Extraction confirmed, Casablanca dockyards. Elias stared at the water, watching the ripples spread from the sunken radio. "They don't know it's a lie," he whispered, the horrifying truth washing over him. Ellie looked at the fading vapor trail of Thorne's plane. That package, that diplomatic pouch, must contain the final, key piece of false information needed to convince Hitler himself. If we don't intercept that exchange in Casablanca, the German High Command will move their entire Panzer Reserve to the wrong location, thinking they've cracked the master plan. "We can't let that pouch reach German hands," Elias declared, grabbing Ellie's arm. "They'll use it to win the war." They commandeered a fast U.S. Navy PT boat, convincing the captain with a fabricated high-priority OSS requisition order. As the small vessel tore through the Mediterranean waves towards the lights of Casablanca, Elias reviewed the captured data. The entire sequence, the Z-1 burst, the dead spy, the logistics report, the suspicious colonel, had all been a sophisticated theatrical performance by the Germans to gain access to that final, damning piece of false intelligence. But what if the truth was even more layered? What if the Allies knew the Germans were listening to the Z-1 channel? "Ellie," Elias said, the boat engine roaring beneath them. "The Germans believed we had a traitor. The Allies knew we were being listened to. What if this entire operation, this ARCADIA cell, the Z-1 channel, was deliberately left open?" The chase wasn't just about stopping an exchange. It was about understanding a deception so deep, so complex, that it risked consuming the deceivers themselves.
Part 3. The Casablanca Exchange. Chapter 11. The Race to the Port. The U.S. Navy PT boat, commandeered under dubious authority, sliced across the waves toward the distant lights of Casablanca. Elias, clinging to the rail, felt the salt spray on his face. He was a mathematician, a man who dealt in the absolute certainty of numbers, now thrust into a chaotic world of high-speed chases and shifting loyalties. Ellie, navigating by memory and rudimentary charts, spoke to the young PT captain, convincing him that the diplomatic pouch contained emergency medical supplies crucial for an impending epidemic, a believable lie in the wartime chaos of North Africa. The boat arrived at Casablanca's bustling, noir-tinged port just after midnight. The city was a maze of darkened streets, shadows, and the hushed, nervous energy of a place where money, secrets, and life exchanged hands nightly. Colonel Thorne's transport plane, having arrived hours before, was long unloaded. They disembarked and immediately sought out the local OSS contact Ellie had flagged, Agent Dubois, a weary, fastidious man who ran a front operation as a customs agent. Dubois was highly skeptical of the pair's story. A dead spy in Algiers, a treacherous colonel, and a German Z-1 signal? "You are asking me to disrupt a meeting between an American colonel and one of our most trusted French resistance contact, Madame Renard?" Dubois stated, adjusting his glasses nervously. "If Renard is compromised, the entire Maquis network in the south collapses. We need proof, Lieutenant." "The proof is in the transmission, Agent Dubois," Elias countered. pulling out the final decrypted Z1 message. Confirmed delivery of package imminent. Extraction confirmed Casablanca dockyards. Thorn is meeting Renard at 0800 in the Blue Bar, far from the dockyards. Why mention the dockyards if the meeting is elsewhere? Dubois conceded the point. The dockyards were a known, unsecured rendezvous point for high-value contraband and sensitive transactions. They agreed on a plan. Dubois would monitor the meeting at the Blue Bar from a distance, while Elias and Ellie would focus on the dockyards, preparing to intercept anyone after they left the bar. Chapter 12. Casablanca, Noir. At 7 a.m., Elias and Ellie took position in a dilapidated warehouse overlooking the main dockyards. Thorn's plane, they learned, had been carrying 2 diplomatic pouches, one containing routine transfers and a second, sealed pouch marked Operational Materials Fortitude. The tension was almost unbearable. Was Colonel Thorn truly the traitor, planning to hand over the final piece of the deception to a German contact disguised as a dock worker? At 8 a.m., Agent Dubois radioed in from the famous Blue Bar on the waterfront. Thorn has arrived. He is alone. 10 minutes later, Madame Renard arrived. She looks normal, very calm. She's dressed impeccably. He described the scene as a quiet, civilized meeting over coffee. Thorn looked stressed, but was performing the role of a liaison officer perfectly. Renard, known for her sharp intelligence and anti-Nazi passion, was an unlikely traitor. As the meeting progressed, Elias and Ellie watched the dockyards. A figure appeared, moving with practiced stealth. A civilian, dressed in the slightly too neat uniform of a Moroccan railway clerk. He was carrying a small, worn leather valise, a classic container for high-security documents. "That's him," Ellie whispered, her hand tightening on her sidearm. "He's too early for the dockyard rendezvous, but he's already in position, waiting for the asset to leave the bar." Dubois interrupted their surveillance. "The exchange has occurred. Thorn placed a small bound file on the table. Renard briefly touched it, then slid it into her handbag. The conversation lasted no more than 5 minutes. Thorn is leaving now, heading back to his lodgings. Renard remains." Elias frowned. "No large diplomatic pouch? Just a small bound file? That doesn't match the importance of the final Fortitude transfer." Ellie adjusted her binoculars, following the Moroccan clerk. "Elias, look at the clerk. He's not moving. He's just standing by the cargo nets, looking toward the bar." They were watching a scene that defied conventional espionage. The high-value exchange had occurred at the bar, far from the dockyards, and the potential German contact was merely standing guard. Chapter 13. The Meeting at the Blue Bar. Elias and Ellie decided to risk breaking cover. They raced toward the Blue Bar, instructing Dubois to keep eyes on both Thorn and Renard. They found Renard still sitting at the bar, nursing a coffee, seemingly unconcerned. Elias, playing the role of a military police lieutenant, approached her table. "Madame Renard, U.S. Army Lieutenant Vance, we need to see the documents Colonel Thorn just gave you." Renard gave a faint, elegant smile. "Documents, Lieutenant. Colonel Thorn gave me the final logistics schedule for the supply transfer to the new Moroccan hospital in Marrakesh. Nothing more exciting than quinine and blankets. Are you doubting my loyalty?" "We doubt the loyalty of the person who gave you the file," Elias retorted, meeting her gaze. Renard sighed and opened her handbag, presenting the small bound file. It was indeed a detailed manifest for medical supplies. Elias's mind raced. The Z1 transmission was clear. Final proof of Fortitude secured. The exchange had to be the final piece of the puzzle that the Germans desperately needed. But this medical manifest was useless. "Ellie, look at her hands," Elias muttered. Ellie noticed Madame Renard's fingers nervously tapping a rhythm on the table. A small, almost imperceptible code. She's signaling, Ellie realized, recognizing the pattern as a common French resistance rhythm code. She's either warning someone or she's sending a message. Chapter 14. The Code in the Music. Ellie excused herself and walked over to the back of the bar, where a small, elderly Moroccan man was playing a slightly off-key piano. The tune was an old, popular French tune. Ellie listened to the rhythm of the music, not the notes. The rhythm was uneven, broken by unnatural pauses and accelerations. She focused on the player's sheet music. It looked like an ordinary score, but the paper was stiff, slightly yellowed, and looked newer than the piano itself. The paper, Ellie realized. The music sheet is the package. She returned to Elias, who was still locked in a stalemate with Renard. Elias, the paper, the music sheet for the piano is the delivery. Elias quickly walked over to the pianist, claiming there was a report of a security breach involving unauthorized documents. He snatched the sheet music. He held the sheet up to the light. It wasn't just paper. It was a high-density photographic negative overlaid with a faint musical score. The negative contained pages of microscopic, highly compressed data, a microdot hidden within the musical notes. Elias, using a small field microscope from his kit, scanned the microdot's contents. The image snapped into terrifying focus. It wasn't a logistic schedule. It wasn't a troop count. It was the final, undeniable set of forged documents showing the Pas-de-Calais invasion orders, complete with fabricated casualty predictions, detailed supply routes, and a highly believable radio traffic plan. It was the ultimate, irrefutable proof of the Allied lie. The kind of data that would convince Hitler's general staff to commit their remaining reserves to defending the wrong coastline. Suddenly, the front door of the Blue Bar burst open. Not German agents, but Major Sterling and a team of British MI6 security officers. Sterling marched in, his face thunderous. "Lieutenant Vance, Captain Hayes, you are under arrest for insubordination and interfering with a live, classified operational exercise." Chapter 15. The Ultimate Deception. The chaos froze. Madame Renard sighed, a smile finally reaching her eyes. "You were meant to be off the case, Elias," Sterling said, nodding toward the microdot music sheet in Elias's hand. "But you've just proved its effectiveness. You were not chasing a traitor, Lieutenant. You were chasing the final layer of Operation Fortitude." The shocking truth was revealed. 1. Arcadia was the deception. The code name Arcadia didn't stand for a traitor. It was the name given to the fabricated, high-level intelligence leak designed by the Allies themselves. They wanted the Germans to believe the highest echelon of Allied command was compromised. 2. The Z1 channel was a trap. The Allies, specifically British MI6's Section B1A, had a double agent who helped them establish a secure, believable German communications channel, the Z1 variant. They then allowed German intelligence to find and trust this channel. 3. Thorne was the bait. Colonel Thorne was an unwitting, loyal logistics officer. He was deliberately sent to Algiers with a sensitive but ultimately irrelevant file, making him the perfect bait for the German spy they wanted to intercept the information. The chaplain was a genuine German agent, but he was allowed to acquire the forged documents and commit suicide, creating a scenario that made the Germans completely confident in their source. 4. The music was the message. Madame Renard, the trusted resistance contact, was the true mastermind of the final step, a highly placed triple agent who worked for the Allies. Her rendezvous with Thorne was a carefully constructed scene designed to look like a high-risk security breach. The real recipient of the music sheet wasn't a German. It was a British double agent operating within the Moroccan railway system, the clerk they saw at the docks, who would then pass the microdot information through the secure, known German rat line toward Berlin. The objective was to ensure the Germans received the forged Pas-de-Calais invasion plans through a route they absolutely trusted and one they believed they had stolen. "The entire purpose of your involvement, Vance," Sterling explained, the patronizing tone gone, replaced with grudging respect, "was to ensure that the German codebreakers, when they inevitably cracked the final Z1 transmission, would have to confirm the location of the exchange, Casablanca dockyards, as an authentic, high-risk operation. You, the top American cryptographer in Algiers, became the final, unwitting human confirmation of the German deception." Elias felt the air drained from his lungs. His intellectual certainty, his relentless pursuit of the truth, had been the final, most crucial variable in the Allies' most complex lie. "We were the pawns," Ellie whispered, realizing the depth of the betrayal of trust. "You were the foundation," Sterling corrected. "The only people who can sell a secret this big are those who don't know they're selling it."
Part 4. The Quiet Victory. Chapter 16. Confrontation. The aftermath of the Casablanca operation was swift, silent, and brutal. Major Sterling's MI6 team immediately secured the microdot sheet, while Elias and Ellie were effectively placed under house arrest in a guarded villa in Casablanca, awaiting transport back to Algiers for processing. Elias was pulled into a sterile, windowless room where Sterling, flanked by a stern-faced OSS colonel who introduced himself only as Control, waited. Control spoke first, his voice gravelly and devoid of emotion. "Lieutenant Vance, Captain Hayes, you disrupted a critically choreographed operation. We commend your dedication to duty, but your unauthorized actions risked exposing the entire Operation Fortitude South. You nearly compromised the Allied effort to deceive the enemy about the impending invasion." "But we found the truth," Elias argued, leaning forward. "We identified the Z1 channel, we confirmed the German strategy, and we prevented the document from falling into enemy hands." "You think you prevented it," Sterling cut in, showing a flicker of irritation. "The document, the microdot, was meant to reach German hands. Madame Renard's triple agent status is known only to the highest level of Allied command. Her job was to act flustered and pass the information on to the rail clerk, our double agent, who would ensure it followed the trusted rat line. You chasing her, arresting her, seizing the material, it introduced a variable of genuine confusion that could have made the Germans doubt the authenticity of the leak." Ellie, who had been brought in separately, spoke with quiet intensity. "We understand the need for deception, but why were we kept in the dark? Why risk your own codebreakers chasing a lie? We were working under the premise of treason." Control looked directly at Elias. "Because, Lieutenant Vance, Captain Hayes, the Germans know your reputation. If you, the best American cryptographer in North Africa, had been briefed, you might have unconsciously altered your behavior, your radio traffic, your reports, in a way that gave away the game. For the deception to work, the German intelligence apparatus needed to believe that your unit had been legitimately panicked by the discovery of an American traitor. Your fear, your urgency, and your resulting confusion were essential layers of the operation." Elias slumped back, realizing the calculated cruelty of the strategy. His entire life's work, the pursuit of unadulterated truth, had been weaponized as a tool for the most profound wartime falsehood. He wasn't a solver, he was a salesman of lies. "So the American asset ARCADIA was just a name?" Elias asked. "Yes. It was the code word for the entire deception scenario, built to lure the Z1 channel into believing they had compromised the real invasion plan." Chapter 17. The Cost of Secrets. The consequences were immediate. Elias and Ellie were absolved of any wrongdoing, but were reprimanded for breach of command discipline. The true punishment was their reassignment. They were permanently pulled off the highly sensitive European cipher work and transferred to the Italian front. "You're too hot," Sterling explained during their final awkward exchange on the Algiers docks. "You now know how the greatest trick of the war was engineered. You know the identities of our highest double agents. You're a security risk simply by existing near the European planning effort." The emotional toll was immense. Elias, the man who trusted numbers, struggled with the realization that the most effective strategy in war was to dismantle trust, even among allies. The constant suspicion strained his professional relationship with Ellie, the one person he had trusted during the chaotic chase. "Do you trust me?" Ellie asked him one evening in their new, dreary outpost near Salerno, Italy. "I trust your deductions," Elias answered carefully. "But I realize now that deduction means nothing if the entire foundation of the problem is a manufactured lie." Ellie stared out at the dark, war-torn landscape. "I trust the men and women whose lives we saved by operating in the dark. The war isn't fought by men seeking truth, Elias. It's fought by men and women willing to sacrifice their own integrity for the greater good. Every secret we kept from us meant one less thing the Germans could confirm. Our fear was a necessary sacrifice." Their job now was mundane, monitoring routine tactical German communications on the heavily entrenched Italian Gustav line. The complex 5-rotor Z1 machine was replaced by the predictable, tiresome 3-rotor tactical ciphers. The silence of the Mediterranean waves, once filled with the phantom threat of the German spy, was now just quiet, heavy static. Chapter 18. The Aftermath. Colonel Thorne, officially cleared of all suspicion, was promoted and publicly lauded for his critical contribution to Allied morale. General Pyle, the target of the German counterintelligence, continued his planning duties, entirely unaware he had been a key piece of the grand strategic lie. The deception held. In the Allied command centers, the data flowed. Because they were so confident in the ARCADIA intelligence, German panzer divisions were held in reserve in the Pas-de-Calais region, reinforcing the coastal defenses against the expected massive but fictional invasion force. Elias in Italy read the reports filtering through from London. The reports showed that the German High Command was dedicating almost 10 full divisions to guard the Pas-de-Calais beaches, a defense force significantly larger than the one dedicated to the actual Normandy coastline. This strategic misallocation of resources, bought by the blackout of Algiers, was the ultimate silent victory. The cost of the secret was measured in the exhaustion and moral compromise of the few who knew the inner workings of the lie. The code breakers had saved the war, but they had sacrificed their own certainty in the process. Chapter 19. The Silence of the Waves. The night of June 5, 1944, was unnaturally quiet at the Salerno listening post. The German tactical chatter was routine, almost dull, focused entirely on expected Allied action against the Italian beachheads. Just after midnight, the airwaves exploded, not with German communication, but with the roar of Allied ships and the desperate, frantic transmissions of the German coastal batteries across the English Channel. Elias and Ellie listened intently, monitoring the panicked German reports. The initial reports were confused, treating the landings as minor raids. Then the realization dawned in the enemy headquarters. A coded German transmission, running on the low-security Hare Army channel, finally came through. It was from Field Marshal Rommel's HQ. Elias translated the raw message in real time, his hands shaking slightly. Urgent. Massive Allied landing confirmed. Normandy beaches. Request immediate deployment of Panzer reserves from Army Group B. Another reply followed instantly, relaying the message from Hitler's headquarters. Order denied. The Normandy action is confirmed to be a large-scale feint to draw away reserves. Maintain defenses at Pas-de-Calais. The true invasion is imminent there. Elias looked up from the page, his eyes meeting Ellie's. The German command, relying on the irrefutable proof provided by the microdot, the rat line, and the Z1 deception, was convinced the main attack was still coming where they had been told to look. Chapter 20. D-Day and the Cipher War. As the sun rose on June 6, 1944, the radios broadcast the official, world-changing news. Operation Overlord had begun. The Allies had landed at Normandy. Elias and Ellie walked outside their small, dusty post, squinting against the bright Italian morning sun. The distant sounds of the Italian front seemed insignificant compared to the historical earthquake occurring hundreds of miles north. "They missed the window," Ellie murmured, tears stinging her eyes, "because of a few numbers and a piece of forged sheet music." Elias confirmed. "The panzer divisions are sitting on empty beaches in France. They had the key to the deception, but they believed the lie because they thought they stole it." Elias looked at the radio antenna silhouetted against the sky. It wasn't the tanks, the ships, or the bombers that had truly secured the beachhead. It was the silent, intellectual war, the cipher war waged in shadows and lies, orchestrated by men and women like themselves, willing to be used as tools in a deception so deep it risked fracturing their own sanity. The blackout of Algiers, the chaotic pursuit of a phantom traitor, had been the necessary sacrifice. They hadn't failed in their mission. They had fulfilled a higher one that had been hidden from them. They stood together, two mathematicians and linguists who had become espionage pawns, their bond forged in the crucible of necessary falsehoods. The victory they had achieved was quiet, unseen, and utterly essential. The truth of the invasion was now history. The lie that secured it was the greatest secret they would ever keep. They had saved the invasion, not by finding a traitor, but by becoming the final layer of the magnificent, terrifying, and necessary blackout of Algiers.